That's the role of Face the Nation, to focus on the issues at hand. That means a civil, contextualized conversation with perspective.
Tonight, as the death toll from the Maui wildfires climbs, the search for those missing intensifies. Then, as residents return to their devastated neighborhoods, some ways you can help. Nora O'Donnell reports from Maui tonight on the CBS Evening News.
This was clearly intended to be a one-sided presentation.
We have signed the pledge to support the nominee because ultimately the mission of reversing the country's decline is bigger than any one person.
Donald Trump is running to stay out of prison. And if we elect...
From the CBS Broadcast Center in New York, I'm Ed O'Keefe. It is day 5 of the Iowa State Fair, 154 days until the Iowa caucus, and 448 days until America decides. Former President Donald Trump faces a possible indictment in the Georgia 2020 election investigation. According to reports, Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis has begun presenting the case to a grand jury with multiple witnesses spotted at the courthouse in Atlanta today. The former president, of course, has been criticizing the DA in social media posts, and he also spent the weekend speaking to voters at the Iowa State Fair. CBS News correspondent Nicole Killian joins us now from outside the courthouse. Nicole, good to see you again. It has been an eventful afternoon with some activity around that courthouse. Who are the witnesses that were suddenly called there today, and why were they called in today as opposed to showing up as scheduled tomorrow?
Well, keep in mind that we have seen a number of witnesses appear at the courthouse today, ranging from the former Lieutenant Governor Chuck Duncan to an independent journalist, George Cheedy. They were the latest witnesses to show up late this afternoon. They were actually slated to testify Tuesday, but came in earlier since it appears that the proceedings are moving a little more quickly than expected. Earlier in the day, we also saw some former state lawmakers, including former House Representative Bean Wynn, as well as former State Senator Jen Jordan. Both of those two lawmakers that I just referenced did attend hearings at the Georgia State Capitol back in December 2020. These were hearings that were kind of called all of a sudden to hear from, at the time, Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani. This happened back in December of 2020 as he was trying to present what he portended was evidence related to some of these false election claims, claims that ultimately ended up being false. But this was really about providing a venue for him to testify, if you will, before a Senate subcommittee at the time. We did speak with Jen Jordan, who, as I mentioned, was one of the witnesses today. Here is her take on what happened at that 2020 meeting. Take a listen. What did you make of Rudy Giuliani's presentation?
It was almost as if it were this mock trial, I should say, like this presentation, very one-sided, because as we know in a trial, you have two sides, right? You have one side that presents one view and the other side presents the other, and then they can punch holes in each other's theories or you know, whatever the allegations are. This was clearly intended to be a one-sided presentation.
So, Nicole, remind us
now, Jordan also...
Go ahead.
I was going to say, Jordan also went on to tell us that, you know, she really at the time questioned and tried to push back against a lot of the claims that Giuliani was making at the time. Remember, there were claims, for instance, that dead people voted here in the state of Georgia, and that during the ballot counting at the State Farm Arena here in Atlanta, he alleged that some election workers were handling illegal ballots that were stuffed in suitcases. So all of that, she said at the time, didn't really hold up in her view. And so she has also previously appeared before the Special Purpose Grand Jury, which was an investigative body that investigated a lot of this evidence both last year and into the early part of this year. But certainly potentially one of the reasons why she was one of several witnesses called here today.
And Nicole, remind us what exactly the former president is potentially facing there in Georgia.
Oh, well, look, it remains to be seen, but certainly there is the expectation that he could be potentially facing a fourth indictment. As you very well know, this is a sprawling case, and, you know, it ranges from investigating that call that the former president had with Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to this false slate of electors that convened in the state capitol to even a voting equipment breach in a rural county here outside of Atlanta. So this is really wide-ranging. A lot of legal experts we have talked to have suggested that it's possible the district attorney could ultimately pursue racketeering charges simply because of the involvement of so many individuals potentially in this case, that racketeering is a tool that prosecutors can use to try to tie all of their evidence together, tie a narrative together. So that is what we will be watching for more specifically as this grand jury continues to convene and ultimately will at some point return a charging decision.
And quickly, Nicole, it doesn't look like there's much of a crowd behind you. Is there still a concern about security if or when some kind of indictment is handed down?
Absolutely. Well, certainly the security barricades remain up. You've got, you know, sheriff's deputies standing on the corner behind me. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that there have been threats made against the district attorney and other county officials. So that is a big reason why you're seeing so much security here around the courthouse, which is likely to continue at least through much of this week.
All right. Nicole Killian there for us in Atlanta, keeping a close eye on that Fulton County courthouse. We will be back to you if there is more information tonight. Thank you for now. While eyes are on Atlanta, as we mentioned, though, the center of the political world was Iowa in recent days, which is where we find CBS News political reporter Musaddiq Badar at where else? The Iowa State Fair. Good to see you, sir. It has been several days of activity there with candidates mixing it up, if you will, with fairgoers. Give us some of your impressions of how it's gone and why an appearance at this fair matters so much as the caucus season continues.
Sure, Ed. I mean, the Iowa State Fair is one of those big events that allows all these candidates to really focus on retail politics, meet fairgoers, meet Iowans, shake their hands, and get away from that campaign rally setting so they can be themselves a little bit more and interact one-on-one with fairgoers. Saturday, by far, was the biggest day with former President Donald Trump here. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was here as well, and their paths kind of crossed at several points. When former President Donald Trump was making his way to Des Moines, there was a buzz at the fairground. A lot of supporters knew he was coming. His team beforehand started handing out hats that said back-to-back Iowa champ with posters, and folks knew where he was going to speak. And it all coincided as Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was at the popular pork chop tent flipping pork chops. And as he's doing this, the former president's plane circulates overhead around the fairgrounds, and everybody pauses to point out that there goes Trump. And when he did get here, there were hundreds waiting to listen to him speak, and there were also jeering on Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. There were a lot of "We want Trump" chants. DeSantis supporters tried to drown that out with USA chants, but you could tell that the atmosphere was really charged between the DeSantis and Trump supporters. Beyond that, former Vice President Mike Pence was also here on Thursday. Former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley also made stops, walking around with Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds at times and Iowa Senator Joni Ernst. So they've all been making their way here. Tomorrow we're expecting more candidates, and we're going to be keeping an eye on what kind of fanfare they get from caucus goers here.
And I know you had an opportunity to speak with some of the fair goers about who exactly they might be considering as their preferred presidential candidate. Why don't we take a listen to that?
He likes Tim Scott. I like him, and I like DeSantis.
I like DeSantis, too. Trump, I'm going to be honest, I would support more of his policies, but I'm probably not a big fan of his personality.
So that gives you a sense of where Iowa voters are thinking. You know, Moose, one of the things that candidates often do at this event is try to demonstrate that they're a person of the people, if you will. And I have a question for you. If at some point you had one shot or one opportunity to seize everything you ever wanted in one moment, would you capture it or would you let it slip? And I think we have an answer to that question from the candidate Vivek Ramaswamy who did this over the weekend. Let's take a look.
Everybody's joking now, the clock's run out, time's up, over, plow, snap back to reality. Oh, there goes gravity, oh, there goes rabbit, he choke, he's so mad, but he won't give up that easy.
For those of you too young to remember, that he was singing or rapping Eminem. Moose, explain
Eminem's
that.
Lose Yourself. That was that was his preferred walkout song. And as part of these Fairside chats that Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds was doing with the candidates, one of the rapid questions she asked all of them was, what's their preferred walkout song? And Mr. Ramaswamy said that it's Eminem's Lose Yourself. But Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds didn't know the song. And as he was walking out, they played the song, and Ramaswamy jumped back on stage with his hat on and started rapping. And the whole crowd was taken back a little bit, and you could tell everybody jumping back on stage was trying to get a sense of what was happening. So anything can happen here at the Iowa State Fair. Candidates could be rapping, or if you recall, in 2015 when Trump showed up here, he came with his helicopter offering people rides at the fair at that time.
Real quick, the best thing you ate over the weekend was?
The Iowa Twinkie, bacon-wrapped jalapeno with corn, ranch dressing. I could only do 2 bites of it, and I'm still recovering, but it was delicious, and it's one of the finalists for this year's top foods.
All right, Musaddiq Badar eating roughage the rest of the week there in Iowa on assignment for us. Thank you, sir. We'll talk to you later in the week.
Thank you, Ed.
Coming up, Republican presidential candidate and former Congressman Will Hurd joins us from the campaign trail. Stay with us. You're streaming America Decides.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
it's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag Oscar So White was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're going to tell you about that, too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
the threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Not one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control,
People are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether.
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
Welcome back to America Decides. Former Congressman Will Hurd of Texas made a name for himself in 2019 by being one of the few vocal Republican critics of then-President Donald Trump. Now he's seeking the Republican presidential nomination himself, and the critiques of the former president haven't let up.
Donald Trump is running to stay out of prison. And if we elect... I know. Listen, I know the truth. The truth is hard.
Will Hurd joins us now from New Hampshire. Congressman, great to have you with us. First off, most of your GOP rivals have been spending their time in Iowa the last few days for the state fair and whatnot. Why aren't you there?
I'll be there in the next couple of days. So I had some events and activities here in New Hampshire, but I'm looking forward to enjoying the fair and bringing my wife to be in Iowa later this week.
Well, we will look for you there. You've taken a harder stance on former President Trump's legal issues than most of your fellow candidates. Are you finding an appetite for a non-Trump candidate among the Republicans you've been speaking to?
Sure, Ed. Here's what we're learning. I've been in this race for 51 days. And, part of what I've been trying to articulate to people is that we need someone who's not afraid of Donald Trump, but is also articulating a vision for the future. If the Republican Party puts Donald Trump up as our nominee, then we are willingly giving 4 more years to President Joe Biden. And you played that clip from Iowa. What you couldn't hear in that, there was a couple of people applauding as well. But people had said, thank you, I appreciate you. At my events here in New Hampshire, I've had folks come from all over the state and say thank you for being honest and for articulating this and trying to stay focused on issues like how do we have unprecedented peace at a time that the Chinese government is trying to surpass us as a global superpower? How do we have a thriving economy at a time when technologies like artificial intelligence is going to upend every industry, not in 10 years, but in 2 or 3 years? And so people appreciate that, someone that's being honest.
And for the record, I was there that night. You're right. There was some applause for what you said, but certainly the boos outnumbered the applause, which is indicative at least of that crowd.
No, of course, and I can't disagree with you there. But again, what I think we sometimes get caught up in, and let me be clear, I recognize that Donald Trump is the front runner, but when you look at his support from 2020 when he was running for re-election, north of 95% of voters, now it's decreased. And the reality is when this gets closer to an election, people want to see something different. And if folks want to see something different, especially on the Republican debate stage, they can go to hurtforamerica.com and donate at least $1 and help me get on that debate stage.
I see what you did there. I'll ask you about that in a second. But let's talk policy for a second, because during your time in Congress, you actually represented about an 800-mile border district there in the Lone Star State that bordered Mexico. You've had several of your opponents go to the border, present their plans. Couldn't help but notice they shot some beautifully lit campaign commercials while they were also there. But you live and represented that area. What's your plan for U.S.-Mexico border security?
Well, sure. The plan's simple. I just rolled out with some specifics a few days ago. Number one, stop treating everybody that comes in this country as an asylum seeker. This started under Donald Trump. It continued under Joe Biden. Number two, treat human smugglers and drug traffickers as terrorist organizations. When you look at 109,000 Americans died last year from fentanyl, 5.5 million people have come into this country illegally, all being used by human smugglers. Now, we have the tools and the resources to make this a national intelligence priority and focus on them as the terrorists that they are, and treat things like fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction. It's a precursor element that has killed a lot of people, and why are we allowing this to go back and forth across our borders? And then we also have to address root causes in places where historically we've seen illegal immigration coming from, particularly the Northern Triangle, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. It's a fraction of the cost to solve the problem there before we have to deal with it on our shores. These are all things that I know work because I've spent time along the border. I represented 820 miles of the border. My time in the CIA tracking terrorists and putting nuclear weapons proliferators out of business. I know the tools that's required, and we need real action, not just tough talk.
So what would you do to address the root causes in those 3 countries?
Well, so first and foremost, our foreign aid, we don't coordinate our foreign aid across all the different entities, whether it's the State Department, USAID, an organization called OPIC, and then also coordinating that with our philanthropic organizations. We have programs that address extreme violence, lack of economic opportunity, and poverty. And so part of that is using those programs that we know have worked in the past and doubling down on them in places in those 3 countries. And then also not looking at our foreign policy in just the bilateral context between us and that country, but looking at it from a regional perspective. Those are all things that the Biden administration has failed to do, the Trump administration hasn't done, and this is something that a Hurd administration would focus on day one.
So it sounds to me you're just saying throw more money at those countries and that'll help solve the problem?
No, it's not just throw more money. It's actually the programs. We know how. So there's examples in El Salvador where we helped the local government hire new police, train them in community policing that works in many of our safest communities. And we've seen a decrease in the amount of crime in those areas where that was done. And we saw a decrease in the amount of illegal immigration that was coming from that region. So those are the kinds of programs that we should be working on and focused on. Why don't we have a regional energy plan for those 3 countries in the Northern Triangle? So those are some of the steps that we should be taking in order to prevent the problem that we're dealing with on our border.
So, so far, about 8 candidates have qualified for the first debate that's about 9 days away now. You think you're going to make it to that stage on August 23rd?
I feel comfortable. We have one more poll that we have to qualify in. We're close to the 40,000 unique donors.
How close?
And I'm looking forward. I'm real close, and your viewers
talking
can
hundreds,
help me go over the edge
tens of
tonight
thousands
at herdforamerica.com. We're close enough to where your viewers can help us get over that finish line.
How flattering
so we're real close. I expect to get there well in advance of the deadline.
And you've got at least 2 other either national or state polls, so you just need a third. Is that what you're saying?
I just need one more poll, either a national poll or a state poll, and there's a number of those that are out. I've been clear that I'm not going to sign a loyalty pledge or a loyalty oath. My problem is not with supporting the Republican nominee. My problem is with supporting Donald Trump. Donald Trump has said he's not even going to sign that loyalty pledge, so who knows what happens over the next 9 days. This was something that he had his people at the RNC try to influence to force all the other candidates to bend a knee to Donald Trump, and I do not plan on signing that as is.
Well, then that would conceivably keep you from the stage, right?
Well, possibly, but like I said, a lot can happen between now and then. We don't even know if Donald Trump is going to show up, and if Donald Trump doesn't show up, if he's too afraid to handle and to answer questions about why he led the GOP to losing races in 2018, why he lost in 2020. The election wasn't stolen from him; it was lost. He prevented us from. He had us lose the Senate, and in 2022, because of Donald Trump, a red wave didn't materialize that everybody thought was going to happen. So if he's too afraid to answer those questions on the debate stage, then we'll see how this unfolds. So lot's going to happen in the next couple of days, but I want to hit those requirements in order to force that conversation.
All righty. Well, former Texas Congressman Will Hurd joining us from lovely Manchester, New Hampshire. We will be in touch. And as you said, 9 days in presidential politics is an eternity. So we'll see what happens.
Take care.
Take care. GOP presidential candidates have descended on the Iowa State Fair. We take a look back at why it's become such a go-to event for those seeking to win the White House. You're streaming America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman. Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job?
I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
To reduce the number of bureaucrats in Washington by at least 50%.
I'll go on record. I'm going to be very honest. I expect to be the nominee. I expect they will not let Joe Biden run against me.
Republicans have lost the last 7 out of 8 popular votes for president. That is nothing to be proud of.
The Iowa State Fair is in full swing with Republican presidential candidates all stopping by, as you saw there, to meet voters and eat a corn dog or two. But why is the Iowa State Fair such a staple of the election season? Well, to answer that, you have to go all the way back to the 1970s, when a little-known Georgia governor, Jimmy Carter, successfully used the victory of the Iowa caucuses to launch his long-shot bid for the presidency. He, of course, campaigned extensively throughout Iowa, beginning in 1975 with a few stops at the fair. And it remains such a big draw for candidates and such a staple of the state's politics because it's one of the few places where 1 million people gather in this smaller state at one time. It means that candidates could potentially reach hundreds of thousands of caucus goers who might not otherwise be attending political events. And one draw for candidates has been the Des Moines Register's Soapbox, something established by the state's largest newspaper back in 2003, giving candidates 20 minutes each to give a speech and take questions.
I'm not a lifelong politician. I spent my life raising a family, living in the private sector, and I want to take the things I've learned to Washington.
I believe we're on the verge of the greatest time to be alive, but here's the problem. Our government doesn't work like it needs to work.
This is the moment that history will judge us by.
The fair is also a good test of how well a candidate does doing normal things, whether it's posing with Butter Jesus, yes, that is Butter Jesus, eating as much fair food as possible, or riding bumper cars. Nearly every political candidate makes a stop at the state fair and smiles for the camera with food in hand. But of course, there's also the possibility that they appear out of touch, and it can lead to some bad headlines and even lasting damage. Take, for example, Fred Thompson Remember him, the Republican senator from Tennessee, criticized for wearing $500 Italian shoes. Who does that at a state fair? And not only that, who rides a golf cart around the state fair? Well, he did. John Kerry was also judged for ordering a strawberry smoothie instead of something fried or meaty during his 2003 visit. And you may remember when Mitt Romney yelled at a heckler that, quote, corporations are people. Well, that also happened at the fair. But most candidates are hoping a stop at the fair merely gives them the launch onto the national stage, like the ones earned in Iowa by George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and, of course, Jimmy Carter. And a programming note, America Decides is heading to the state fair. We will be live from the fair in Des Moines on Wednesday. My colleague Major Garrett will be there all day long on Wednesday to anchor a special edition of the program. Watch it right here, of course, on CBS News Streaming. That does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
It's a history-making meeting. 4 extraordinary women who are all 4-star generals and admirals.
How did you deal with being discriminated